you deem that these are pretty obvious apart from the warning that's put on as a label. Here's one. Public pool. This was posted at a public pool. No swimming if you can't swim. Well, duh. I mean, if you can't swim, then you're not swimming. So, vanishing fabric marker. I love this one. Vanishing fabric marker should not be used for signing checks. Unless, of course, you know they're going to bounce. Okay? This blows my mind. A mattress. Okay? A mattress. On a mattress. Do not attempt to swallow. Yeah. Instead, dice it up into edible morsels. Really? Come on. No, they didn't say that. I had it. I'm not going to mention the name brand, but a particular name brand of an iron. And we've all seen this one. Do not iron clothes while on body, right? Unless, of course, you're pressed for time. Chainsaw. Do not hold on the wrong end. Seriously? I'm glad it didn't add, especially while the motor's running. Blowtorch. Not to be used for drying your hair. Unless, of course, you prefer the color auburn. Laundromat, washing machine. Do not put any person in this washer. Evidently, pets are permitted. Box of fireworks. Do not put in mouth unless soap hasn't done the job to clean up your language. Prescription for the family dog. Alcohol. This is for a dog. A prescription on a bottle. Alcohol may intensify drowsiness. Use care when operating a car. If I catch Jabez drugging and drinking, I'm taking away his license. One more. The most astute one of them all, and it doesn't matter what label, what product this label is going on. It could be used for any. If you cannot read this warning, do not use this product. Really? Maybe just a tad common sense would preclude the need for such ludicrous warning labels, don't you think? If there's ever been a day when our culture cries out for common sense, it's today. And so for the next several months, I'm going to see if we can't provide some instruction in what I would call uncommon sense, a beyond the normal sense, what the Bible calls wisdom. Remember the memory verse? If you prize wisdom, she will make you great. We're going to study several subjects that demand wisdom in order to live a successful life over the course of the next several months. Topics like healthy relationships, parental discipline, a good work ethic, appropriate conversation, godliness, and the list goes on. And all of these are found in the book of wisdom, a.k.a. also known as the book of Proverbs. Thank you. The book of Proverbs. So we begin this morning by offering the simplest biblical definition of the word wisdom. In the original language, in the Hebrew language, the basic underlying root meaning of the term is simply this: skill in living. Skill in living. It's all the cylinders clicking in the course of every day of our lives. And so for today, I want us to cover two major points under this topic. First of all, wisdom's worth, and then wisdom's work. The inherent value that we find in wisdom, and how do we go about acquiring it? What do we need to do from our standpoint, from our vantage point, that will enable us to grow in wisdom? And so we begin, first of all, with looking at wisdom's worth. You're welcome to turn with me in your Bibles if you'd like. I'm going to be reading from Proverbs chapter 4 this morning, verses 5 through 9. Proverbs chapter 4, verses 5 through 9. Here's what we read. Get wisdom. Develop good judgment. Don't forget my words or turn away from them. Don't turn your back on wisdom, for she will protect you. Love her, and she will guard you. Getting wisdom is the wisest thing you can do. And whatever else you do, develop good judgment. And then our memory verse, if you prize wisdom, she will make you great. Embrace her, she will honor you. She will place a lovely wreath on your head. She will present you with a beautiful crown. You may remember this back from your English grammar days, but you never define a word by using that same word in the sentence of definition. Remember that? Remember learning that back in junior high school probably? Never use a word to define itself. And yet verse 7 literally reads here what? Getting wisdom is the wisest thing you can do. So that doesn't really help us define it. But as I said earlier, the original language tells it means skill in living. Getting a skill for living is the wisest thing then that you can do. Literally, the text here in verse 7 says the beginning of wisdom is to acquire wisdom. So what's the point of that phrase in that verse? That living skillfully needs to be a priority. Living wisely needs to be a top drawer priority in our lives. And we've got to begin somewhere. Logically, wisdom isn't going to come to us haphazardly or hastily. It's not going to come by chance. It's not going to come overnight. We've got to chase it down. We've got to go after it. We've got to pursue it with passion, or it's just not going to happen. This pursuit creates a real problem for many within the Christian community today, and for the obvious reason, to do all that takes what? Time. Something none of us has, right? Takes time. Not just hard work, but sustained discipline protracted over time. In other words, it's not something that can be ordered online through Amazon.com. And you'll get it in just about a few days. Much less can you drive up to the convenience window at the local wisdom store and place an order that gets you served in less than a minute. Doesn't happen that way. Wisdom is a process, and one that really takes a lifetime of purposeful effort. But here's the good news, folks, that you do not want to miss. With every day that we strive to gain a little bit more wisdom, guess what? We do. When we strive to gain wisdom, when we seek the Lord for wisdom, guess what? It will happen. I will be more wise. Now, I'm sure, I know this, not just intuitively, but I also know this because of the scriptural revelation, that none of us is as divinely blessed as the principal author of this book. Who wrote this book of Proverbs? Most of it, anyhow. Not all of it, but most. Who? King Solomon. Right, King Solomon. Shortly after he took office, and God was very pleased with how he had been walking with him, and of course he was the son of King David, the man after God's own heart, one of the premier models of spiritual integrity throughout all of the scriptures, and Solomon had the privilege of living under this man, growing up in his home. Well, shortly after he then succeeds his father on the throne, God asked him to choose anything that he wanted for himself. Now, think about what the options out there would have been. What are some of the things the human bent would typically grasp for? Money. Money, right? Wealth. What else? Okay, love. Yeah, I didn't think about that one. Yeah, but people say, I want to be loved. What else? Say it again. Okay. What are some of the more, think of our human bent. That's not our human bent typically. Because our human bent is what? Me. It's not about what I do for others. It's about me, our human bent. We're selfish. So we want money. What else do we want? Okay, happiness. That's a big one today, isn't it? And parents, what do we often hear? I just want my kids to be happy. I don't know about you. I want my kids to be holy. And if we're holy, then they're going to be happy. But you can be happy and far from holy and spend your eternity, never mind. You get the point. So what are the kind of things that he could have wanted? Wealth, power. He's a king. I want to dominate the world. Here's another one, acceptance. Here's another one, longevity. I want to live a long life and a good, healthy life, right? These are the kind of things that he could have requested. But what did Solomon do? He went against the natural bent of his human grain, and he asked for, what did he ask for? Wisdom. He asked for wisdom. And the neat thing is God, in dumping this massive amount of wisdom on him instantaneously, he also gave him all those other things that he didn't ask for. Isn't that cool? But why I brought that up is because Solomon is an exception here. He was given wisdom instantaneously, and he's the wisest man who ever lived, second to but one, and that was the Lord Jesus. The rest of us, Jesus is naturally wise because he's God. Solomon was naturally wise because he was gifted. But you and I, guess what? We ain't so naturally gifted in that area. We got to work at it, and it takes time. It's not going to just happen overnight. Wisdom takes time, and it takes toil. Now, back to those verses that I began with when I read verses 5 through 9 in chapter 4. I want to repeat for you just a moment, the verbs, the action verbs that leapt from those verses about wisdom. Get wisdom, love wisdom, prize wisdom, embrace wisdom. Yeah, get the point that God really would like us to have wisdom? Yeah, obviously. There's something inestimably valuable about wisdom. So whatever it takes, we're to make it happen. That's what we're being told. Now, when I say inestimably valuable, that's not really me saying that. I'm just quoting what Solomon had said earlier when he wrote in chapter 3. Let me read to you this verse back in chapter earlier. Wisdom is more profitable than silver, and her wages better than gold. Wisdom is even more precious than rubies. Nothing you desire can compare to gaining wisdom. That should be a top drawer priority in our lives, just from a common sense standpoint. Wouldn't we want that so we can live successfully, skillfully? Wisdom is more precious than silver, gold, precious rubies. Nothing compares to wisdom. How so? Because its dividends far surpass any monetary payout. And the whole of this book unveils more than just a few benefits. I mean, as we look through the whole book, we see that wisdom does this and does this and does this. Let me just give you a sampling. Chapter 2, verses 12 through 16. Wisdom there saves us from evil and immoral people. If we live wisely, we don't have to worry about how other people that are not wise, who are evil and immoral, how they could impact us if we didn't act wisely. Then in chapter 3, verses 18 and 35, we learn that wisdom pays for a life of sustained happiness and honor. Happiness there being blessedness. And in chapter 6, verse 6, we learn that wisdom yields productivity in whatever we put our hands to do. How important is that when we know we need to put food on the table every day? Now, just from the verses that we read earlier, we learn that wisdom provides us more than a couple of things. In verse 6, wisdom protects. And it protects in two major realms, obviously. In the physical realm, it means that if we live wisely, we're not going to risk being ensnared by reckless choices that we make that could either injure us, maim us, or even kill us. Simple example. If we're wise, we're not going to drink and drive, right? Even the secular culture warns us about that. Hello? But how about in the more important spiritual realm? This means that if we live wisely, we won't find ourselves routinely in the crosshairs of Satan. Granted, you and I are never totally out of his scope, but he won't be hunting us down with the same ferocity that he does with other Christians who are choosing not to live so wisely. And the reason for that is because Satan recognizes that Christians who choose not to live wisely are an easy mark. They're an easy target. I can gun them down and do a lot of havoc pretty easily. I think each one of us needs to look in the mirror and ask, is that us? Is that me? Is that you? Chapter 4, verse 8, we learn something else about wisdom. Wisdom leads to greatness and honor. And of course, these two terms need to be understood from the divine perspective, not a human perspective. It really doesn't matter what other people ultimately think of us. Ultimately, it matters what God thinks of us, right? So, how does God view us through his lenses? You know, not so long ago, listening to the news, all over the news, Cuba had buried its longtime dictator, Fidel Castro. And if you read a lot of the aftermath of his demise and the tributes coming in, you know that there were tens of thousands of people who viewed him as great and honorable. But to millions that were responding, they were saying he was a tyrant. But you know what? To some degree, that doesn't matter at all. The ultimate question is, how did God view Castro? I don't know the answer to that. I know some of the things he did, and I can speculate, and I don't think his lifestyle matched what I would think would be honoring to God. But I know this. Right now, Fidel Castro knows God's view of him. Let's take a contrast to Fidel Castro. Somebody still living in his 99th year. Anybody know who I'm talking about? Billy Graham. He rose from obscurity. From obscurity. You know, when he was Bible college days, he used to go out and preach to, this is no kidding, he would preach to the fish out over a pond, practicing. I know it sounds fishy, but it's not. That's what he would do. He became the counsel to every United States president from Harry S. Truman on. He has appeared more times in Gallup's annual top 10 most admired people of the world list more than anybody else since Gallup's been doing it. And I just checked out this year's because it just came out, and he was included again. I think he came in 5th place this year. He's listed there more times than anybody else. Anybody want to take a guess how many years he's been listed in the top 10 most admired people in the world? How many? Give me a number. 35. More. 75. 60. 60 this year. 60. I'm still waiting for my first appearance. No, that ain't going to happen. 60 times. And then in 1996, Congress bestowed upon him the highest private citizen award. What's it called? The Congressional Medal of Honor. Congressional Medal of Honor. He received that. Very few from the private sector ever received that. But even all that pales in comparison. What is Billy Graham in God's eyes? I think we have a little sense of that he's probably even viewed with greater honor from God's eyes than even the honor that he's receiving amongst his peers, you and me, amongst his fellow mankind. I say that because up until his health began to fail him and he had to kind of take a back step from ministry, I think it was around 2008, up to that point in time, he had reached, and keep in mind there's about 7 billion people on the face of the globe. He had reached some 2.2 billion. That's about a third of the world's population by either radio or television or in person. That's incredible. And of that number of 2.2 billion, there are 3.2 million who had responded either written or going forward at a crusade with saying, I accepted Jesus Christ as personal Lord and Savior. 3.2 million. I think from God's perspective, his lenses, Billy Graham is an incredible man. No different than you and me, except that he's following the vision and passion that God laid upon his heart back as a late teenager. It's worth it to pursue wisdom, because wisdom itself has great worth. The question then is, how do we go about acquiring it? It's great worth, and it'll do things for us in the horizontal sphere, but how much better to be honored by God? That's what we should want. So how do we go about acquiring it? I would suggest to you maybe these 3 steps. What is wisdom's work? I submit to you these 3. First of all, chase after a proper understanding of who God is and reverence him accordingly. Many of us act in a way that we've kind of devalued God. We've taken him a little bit too casually. We've devalued him. You know, we might refer to him, and we don't think about it, but we call him the man upstairs. First of all, he's not a man. And he's not just up on that second or third or or penthouse level. He's not the big guy in the sky. He's not the genie in the sky. He's not the celestial Santa Claus. No. And though we don't say these things, sometimes our unspoken motto in life really comes down to our self-serving nature, not your will, but mine be done, right? Folks, who are we talking about here? We're talking about God, the creator and sustainer of everything that there is within the 40-plus billion and counting galaxies that we know about. And he is also the provider, the redeemer, and the rewarder of every one, believer and unbeliever alike. As such, he doesn't deserve just token acknowledgement. He's a good guy. God's cool. He's my buddy. He's God, folks. He deserves much more than casual and intermittent contact. You know, we live in a day of entitlements, don't we? And all of us, you know, think we have certain entitlements. It's easy to point the finger and say, oh, that group there, that group there, that group there. All they want, you know, that's the flesh. That's us. We want something. I submit to you that there's but a single entitlement that is due, and that's due to one person, and it isn't you, it isn't me, it's to God, and it's our full and faithful devotion. And the Bible sums it up with this term, and the book of Proverbs uses it repeatedly, the fear of the Lord. A word that means reverence. Viewing God with awe. You remember, some of you, several months ago, I said, I don't like to use the word awesome a whole lot because we've made that too casual. Because there's truly only one thing, and it ain't a thing, it's a person who's awesome. It's God. All three members of the Trinity, Father, Son, and Spirit, they're awesome. He deserves our full and faithful devotion. Job recognized this. Chapter 37, verse 24, we read, no wonder people everywhere fear him. All who are wise show him reverence. In a month's time, we're going to look at this very subject of the fear of the Lord. And we're going to hopefully plummet into its depths when we read that revelation. For the fear of the Lord is the beginning of, who knows? The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. So that's where we need to begin. That's what we're going to be looking at. People who accurately view God will live measurably and markedly more wisely, more skillfully than those who don't. So what was that first principle again? First step, if you will. Chase after a proper understanding of who God is and reverence him accordingly. The second thing we need to do is, once we grasp who he is and we're reverencing him, then we need to cry out to him what Jesus' half-brother James in chapter 1 of his letter in verse 5 once wrote, if you need wisdom, what do? Ask God, who gives it lavishly. If you need wisdom, ask our generous God, and he will give it to you. And when you ask, you must ask in faith without doubting. Okay? Without doubting. What do we know about real deal faith? The faith that doesn't doubt. James goes on to address this later in chapter 2 of his little letter. He tells us that faith without works is dead. Faith without works is dead. Meaning that real faith, it's alive, it's vibrant, it's not static. It's not just an ism you talk about, it's a thing that you do. You exercise faith. It's a verb, it's not a noun. More of a verb than a noun. It's what you do. You trust. You lean upon. You rely. You deposit who you are into who he is. I would add that in addition to faith, God will only grant wisdom when we display genuine, any guesses on this one? Humility. Humility. And I believe Solomon perfectly illustrated exactly this requirement, and I think this is what contributed to him receiving all the other stuff, the power, the glory that he received, the wealth, the dominion, all that kind of stuff, because he was humble. We see that in 1 Kings, the historical record of Solomon asking for this wisdom. Looking at 1 Kings chapter 3, verses 7 through 9, he says, "Now, O Lord my God, you have made me king instead of my father David, but I'm like a little child who doesn't know his way around. And here I am in the midst of your own chosen people, the Israelites, a nation so great and numerous, they can't be counted. So give me an understanding heart so that I may govern your people well." In other words, give me wisdom. "And help me to know the difference between right and wrong." Wisdom. "For who by himself is able to govern this great people of yours?" It's hard to miss those elements that are tucked into that passage there that betray Solomon's genuine humility, his sincere humility. First of all, he recognized it was God who coronated him. "You made me king now instead of my dad. Dad was a great king for 40 years. He's now, passing off the scene. It's time for succession. But I recognize that you appointed me, Lord. You appointed me." Also, he realized that he alone was insufficient for so monumental a task as leading this nation to where God would have them to be. There was so much responsibility tucked into that job of being king. And he knew he needed to depend on God. Finally, third, he grasped that he could only do his job well if it was on God that he allowed himself to be guided by daily. Every day he had to trust that God would lead him to what he needed to do. So, you need to know that God's fully in our court in wanting us to be wise. And what do we need to do in order to be wise? We ask him for wisdom. We ask in faith, and we ask in humility, or with humility. And the great thing is, when we do that, he provides the answers to our every indecision. He directs us where we need to go. He fits the need for whatever need we might have. And he primarily does this through his word, because that's how he speaks to us. So it's important that we're bathing ourselves in this book, because other than that, we're not really getting any direction in our lives. That's why we need to have this book as our north point, our guiding star. And even just a cursory reading just of the book of Proverbs will make each one of us a little bit wiser. Just a cursory reading. Then if we do a fervent study into this book, just this book, let alone the whole word, you know what? We're going to be a lot more wise, such that others will take notice how wise we are. Still looking for a New Year's resolution? How many of you made resolutions for the new year? Okay, nobody. Good, let's move on. Okay. Are you looking for one? I'm going to give you one anyhow, okay? How many chapters are in the book of Proverbs? 31. Most months of our calendar year have how many days? 31, okay? I would suggest to you that we together embark on a joint project of reading a chapter a day from the book of Proverbs through all of 2017. Now, obviously, those of you that are your math scholars out here, you're having some trouble figuring this out, because what am I going to do in April and June and September and November? You skip chapter 31, obviously, and go back to no. You double up somewhere along the line. And we're already, and then there's February. Oh, my goodness. We've got a real problem, And today is January the 8th. John, you're going to have to go home and catch up. 7 chapters worth. It's going to take a while. But that's why you married Louise. She'll read to you, John. In all seriousness, wouldn't that be a great joint project to encourage each other from what we're learning in our personal study of the book of Proverbs by reading a chapter a day? And think about it. If we're doing this every month, by the end of the year, we have read through the book how many times? Now I know why your brother is naming your new group Awake. Time to wake up. 12 times by the end of this year. So second, what did I say? that we cry out to God. We ask for wisdom. In faith and with humility. Third thing I submit to you is that we love this when we hang around with wise people. We hang around with wise people. Proverbs 13:20 says this, "He who walks with the wise will himself or herself become wise." It's kind of like a no-brainer. Back in my earlier days, during my athletic prime, I never really had a prime. I was what was that one movie? He's a legend in his own mind. That's me. I'm a legend in my own mind. I was the only one that thought I was good. Anyhow, I loved basketball. I wanted to be a good little basketball player. And the key operative term there was what? Little. I was little. I wasn't the kind of guy that would do too well out on the basketball court. I was vertically challenged. But one thing I did learn early on, that in order to become better, what do you think I did? Say it again? Okay, I practiced, but go with that. How did I practice? With people that were tall? Yes, I did. And what? Wider? Wiser. No, not necessarily. Guys that could play the game, that were better than me. We hone ourselves when we surround ourselves with people that are better than us for whatever the area might be. That's kind of what mentoring is, isn't it? Anyhow, I surrounded myself with these guys. So I worked real hard at boxing these big boys out, Here I am at 5'8", and back in high school I was 5'6". I actually grew 2 inches in the summer when I went off to college, but 5'6", I'm boxing these guys out that were trees in front of me. I also learned how to drive the lane against these guys who were 6'10" and up. Didn't often survive too well. Anyhow, it was amazing what you would learn to do. You would improvise around your own obvious deficit. I hung around with better athletes than myself, and they made me better at the game I love to play. Want to be better at wisdom? Hang around wise guys. Wiser people. Last week I spoke, during when we had the trilogy of elders. I shared my little piece about mentoring. I think mentoring is a fulfillment of the Great Commission to make disciples. I think it's our cultural 21st, end of 20th century and early 21st century key word to talk about discipleship, because we're not going to hear that term out in the secular community. So it's mentoring. But spiritually, it's making disciples. Here's what I suggest you to do. Ask someone wiser than you to mentor you. And you're always going to find somebody wiser than you. You're always going to find somebody less wise than you. So ask somebody who's wiser than you and just buddy up with that person. Spend time together. And I promise you, if you really do this, if you make this a heart cry and really pursue this, come next year, if you've done this through the course of the year, come next year, people are going to come to you and ask you to mentor them. Then you know you're fulfilling the Great Commission. So, who's the wise guy? Whoever gets, loves, prizes, and embraces wisdom. It'll be the wisest thing you ever do, second only to getting, loving, prizing, and embracing Jesus. Because when you think about it, isn't he the very personification of perfect wisdom? Yeah, he is. Let's get, love, prize, and embrace him. And wisdom will come. Father, thank you for your word. And I pray that all of us would pursue this with our whole heart. That's what you desire, a wholehearted service, not half-hearted. You're not impressed by token ritual. You're impressed by hearts that fall before you and lean upon you. Make us to be those kind of men and women, boys and girls, that you desire us to be. Wise people in the midst of a culture, Lord, that is coming unraveled at every seam. And people in the secular arena are going to be flocking for answers. And we know who has those answers, Lord. You do. But because they don't know you, we are the connecting point from them to you. I pray that we would bathe in your word so that we would be wise, just like your Son, in whose name we pray with thanksgiving.